You know, I think we can all agree that 2003 was a great time to be alive. Beyonce was at the top of the charts, Mario Kart Double Dash was on the GameCube, and the American military was finally able to bring peace to the Middle East.
This nigga very possibly has weapons of mass destruction.
It was also the year that a small independent film called 28 Days Later did the impossible, not only by becoming a massive success on just a $5 million budget, but also by bringing the long-dead zombie movie back to life. Cut to 22 years later, and things are pretty much the same. Beyonce is still killing it, the United States is still bringing peace to the Middle East, and the sequel to 28 Days Later has finally made its way to the big screen. So, has director Danny Boyle managed to do what J.J. Abrams, Ridley Scott, James Mangold, Rian Johnson, Tim Burton, Jason Reitman, Fede Alvarez, David Gordon Green, Tim Miller, and so many others couldn't do, and make a sequel that fans can actually get excited about? Well, let's find out as we take a spoiler-free look at 28 Years Later. So, 28 Years Later is the story of Jamie, a scavenger and hunter, who along with his family live in a small island community just off the coast of Great Britain. Ever since the outbreak of the rage virus, which happened 28 years ago, the entire country has been put in quarantine, meaning that nearly for 3 decades, survivors of the outbreak have had no help from the outside world as they fight against incredibly harsh conditions, like bad food, terrible weather, and the constant threat of being killed by people with bad teeth. Essentially, it's exactly how Britain is today, except with fewer stabbings.
Wonder what this feels like. Ow!
Anyway, as the movie starts, it's a very special day for Jamie, because today is the day that he gets to take his son Spike to the mainland and teach him how to scavenge for supplies, hunt deer, and kill any of the infected that they come across. Unfortunately, however, it doesn't take long for this father-son camping trip to go terribly wrong, as Jamie and Spike find themselves overrun by infected, forced to hide in an abandoned house overnight, and having to find a way back to the island without being seen by the infected who are waiting for them in the woods. And from there, what started out as a promising movie with a strong opening eventually turned into an absolute mess of a film that's very disjointed, has a paper-thin plot, refuses to properly flesh out any of its themes, full of outdated, hard-to-watch editing, and ultimately is a big disappointment. But before I get into all that, I'd like to mention the stuff that I liked about the movie. The first of which is Alfie Williams, who plays Spike. To me, he is absolutely the standout in this movie. In fact, I think he may have given the best performance of a child actor that I've ever seen. He has a very natural screen presence and had great chemistry with all the actors involved. Honestly, I can't say enough good things about his performance, and the fact that he's only 14 years old really puts into perspective just how good he really is. Also, I appreciated the surreal visual elements that have been incorporated into the movie that sometimes elevate the film from its genre roots and goes into interesting and unexpected territory. And had this movie taken the time to explore those elements, I think this could have been an exceptional film. However, much like its themes, these surreal moments fall short of being fully realized. Which brings me to my next point. This movie suffers from trying to tackle too many ideas. Simultaneously, it tries to tackle things like the nature of mankind, dealing with grief, the dangers of isolationism, government overreach, and many others. Ideas that sound good on paper, but unfortunately work to the movie's detriment because there just isn't enough time fleshing them out, which in turn causes them to fall flat. Also, this excess of ideas causes the world building required to understand the status quo that the characters live in to fall by the wayside. For instance, we are told by a title card that the rest of the world has moved on after the outbreak in the first movie, and that the United Kingdom has been cut off by the rest of the world, but it never addresses why the global community is okay with an entire country being filled with virus-infected people who could one day escape the country. I mean, if we're to accept the fact that the people who become infected no longer just starve to death like they did at the end of the first movie, but instead have adapted and learned to eat anything that they can get their hands on to survive, then we would also have to assume that one day they could figure out how to get off the island and infect other countries. It would stand to reason that the rest of the world would agree that the United Kingdom would need to be nuked, or at the very least firebombed, to keep the virus from spreading. But for some reason they haven't, and they seem to be fine with this plan, which will fail sooner or later. So, why? Throughout the movie, questions like this start to pop up because Alex Garland, the screenwriter, has refused to properly lay the groundwork for the story that he's trying to tell, and he seems to expect the audience just to accept these these things that should have been explored further. Also, this is a very disjointed movie, so much so that oftentimes it feels like 3 different movies crammed into one script, with the first third being a coming-of-age story, the second part being a video game-style escort mission, and the third being a strange Apocalypse Now-inspired film about grief. The lack of cohesion between these parts makes it hard to become fully invested in the film, but the most egregious shift in the movie's tone comes at the very end, which is so strange and bizarre that I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. For the sake of spoilers, I can't say too much about it, but just imagine for a moment the ending of the Book of Eli. Only this time, instead of Mila Kunis walking through the desert to find her mother, she instead fights a bunch of clowns who have randomly shown up in a tiny car. Now, you may think I'm being hyperbolic with that description, but trust me, I'm not. The ending of this movie is so out of left field that it made people in my theater say out loud, "What?" Finally, adding to the jarring experience of this movie was the editing. It's very frantic and really made the movie hard to watch. Editing choices that may have worked 22 years ago in the first movie, but now are just tiresome and outdated. And speaking of outdated, for some reason, Danny Boyle has decided to incorporate bullet time, or at least something akin to it, to this movie's action sequences, which is a decision that I just find baffling. I mean, bullet time has only ever been cool once, and that was in the first Matrix. In fact, by the time the second Matrix came out, it was already out of date, and using it in a movie was something that parodies, like Scary Movie, were doing as a joke. All of these issues, including some that I can't talk about because of spoilers, make 28 years later a big disappointment. And once again, we see why trailer companies are paid so much money, because the trailer really made this movie look like it was going to be something special, and unfortunately, it's just not, even though it desperately wants to be.